Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you could join us today. Welcome, welcome. So I know folks are still going to be hopping on probably for the next couple of minutes from our waiting room. Big thank you to Tia for managing that wait room for us. We do have quite a lot of content to get through today, so I am just going to dive into a couple of housekeeping items at the top of the hour here. First of all, as per usual, we will have an open Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So please do feel free to enter your questions in the chat box below at any time throughout today, and we'll ensure that your questions are read aloud and answered at the end. A quick content warning for those of us hopping on. Today's presentation may be a bit challenging for some of our viewers. We are no strangers here to heavy themes. We often discuss things like family violence and animal abuse in this webinar series. However, today's presentation may include some descriptions of animal cruelty and a brief discussion of animal sexual abuse. So if you do need to step away, take a break, or even exit the webinar at any point today, you are welcome and encouraged to do so. It is so important that you all take care of yourselves. All right, so today we are going to be joined by Emily Lewis and Kathleen Wood with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which is an organization that is actually based right here in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. I am particularly excited to welcome Emily today, as we actually used to work together at the Oregon Humane Society years ago. It's really wonderful to have you here, Emily. Emily is the managing attorney for the criminal justice program at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where she supervises and facilitates assistance in active criminal cases, working directly with law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, veterinarians, and rescue groups. She supports and trains frontline responders on search warrant drafting, evidence collection and preservation, and scene processing best practices. And she has presented nationally and internationally on the importance of the veterinarian's role in recognizing, reporting, and responding to animal neglect and abuse. Emily is also the co-author of the textbook Animal Cruelty Investigations, a collaborative response from victim to verdict, and co-creator of the online course Victim to Verdict, the veterinarian's role in animal cruelty investigations. She currently serves on the board of the International Veterinary Forensic Sciences Association and the National Sheriff's Association's Animal Cruelty Committee. She holds a JD and a Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School, where she graduated with honors. Emily, we're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are also so happy to welcome Kathleen Wood, Senior Staff Attorney with the Criminal Justice Program at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Kathleen works with prosecutors, law enforcement, and legislators throughout the United States to enforce and strengthen animal protection laws. Kathleen leads the production of the Animal Legal Defense Fund's annual Animal Protection Laws Ranking Report, which compares the various strengths and weaknesses of each state and territory's animal protection laws. She also oversees the production of farmed animal cruelty guides, which are state-specific resources developed for investigators and prosecutors to aid in identifying and addressing crimes perpetrated against farmed animals. Finally, Kathleen represents the Animal Legal Defense Fund in coalitions and partnerships with other organizations, including the National Link Coalition and the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges. It is truly my pleasure to welcome both Emily and Kathleen today. We are so grateful for your knowledge and your expertise. We have a lot of content to get through this morning, so Emily and Kathleen, please take it away.
Thank you, Danielle, for that wonderful introduction. And definitely want to start by thanking Red Rover for this opportunity to talk with you all today. We want to extend a huge gratitude to all of you attending today. We know that time is a resource, and we are appreciative that you chose to spend this time with us today, learning about this important topic. So thank you. I wanted to start just by talking a little bit more about the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Not everyone knows our organization. As Danielle said, we do have a large portion of staff here in the Portland area, but we are a national nonprofit that seeks to improve the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system. We have various programs within our organization, and like you heard in our introduction, Kathleen and I work for the criminal justice program there. Um, so just to give a quick overview of the presentation, we're going to talk about the human-animal bond and how that plays into situations involving interpersonal and familial violence. Talk about the research that's been done about that connection a little bit, and then take a look at the laws that protect animals and also the laws that recognize that connection between animal cruelty and human violence. So next slide, Kathleen, please. But first, we're going to start with the human-animal bond. Anyone out there who has a companion animal knows inherently what this means, what this feels like, right? And but up here on the slide here is the definition from the Human-Animal Bond Research Institute. It talks about the mutually beneficial relationship, and it talks about essential to the health and well-being of both beings involved. And related to that, I just wanted to add in some fun statistics or facts to add to really give weight to the human-animal bond and why it is so special and important. Go back one still, actually. So stroking an animal actually reduces blood pressure and heart rate, even more than sitting with a person or just resting. And dogs and their humans release oxytocin when they are gazing at each other, which increases the feeling of trust and love and connectedness. Cats purring has been found to lower the risk of heart attack and actually promote bone density. And petting a dog, any dog, not just your dog, has been shown to increase dopamine, so enjoyment, and release endorphins, which are associated with pain relief and elation. Okay, next slide. So that really explains why our relationship with animals has changed over time, from the time when a lot of dogs were living outdoors or they were working dogs, guard dogs, that type of thing, to now they are in the home with us, in the bed with us, in our partner. And anyone who again has that companion animal knows how much time and money you spend making sure that they feel comfortable in your home, are happy in their lives with you. I have two large dogs, and we've been through so many beds to find that Goldilocks bed for them, because they are part of the family. And 91% of people who have companion animals consider them to be part of their family, and like their children or their siblings or their grandchildren. And even to the point where they would prefer to have an animal stranded on an island with them versus a human companion. And then of course, the most entertaining statistic here on the slide is that 40% of married female dog owners report that they receive more emotional support from their companion animal than from their husbands or their children. So you can see such a strong bond there for a lot of reasons. But because of that, because they've become part of our family, it does put them in the crosshairs when there is a familial violence happening or an abusive situation going on in the home, because they are a member of the family and they represent a vulnerable type victim, like a child or an elder or a partner. And because of the emotional connection that people have with their animals, they become an easy tool for an abusive person to use to exploit in furtherance of control or coercion in that type of a situation. Next slide. A while back, but still fairly recently, the FBI started collecting statistics on animal cruelty to see how often these offenses were occurring, what type of offenses happen most often, that sort of information. They're still finessing how to get the most comprehensive and accurate data, but as of right now, what this information shows us is that 69% of animal cruelty incidents happen in the home, which makes sense because we learned about how many people have them as part of their family in their home. But what's compelling is that when looking at when animal cruelty was reported in conjunction with another crime, um, it it came out with these percentages that you see here, that when animal cruelty was reported with another crime, 22% of those times it would be simple assault, 15% it would be aggravated assault, and 10% a weapons violation. So really adding statistics and data to support that link connection and seeing how these crimes are happening together. Next slide. And again, many of you know the research goes even further to support the statistics. The research of survivors, that women in domestic violence shelters are 11 times more likely to report that their partner hurt or killed a pet than a woman who has not suffered domestic violence. And that women who had companion animals during their abusive relationship reported threats or harm or abuse to their animal in that situation. And that really confirms what we see anecdotally in our casework nationwide. Next slide. The research has also come to determine that companion animal abuse is one of the 4 most significant factors for someone to become a domestic abuser, and is an indicator of the use of controlling and violent behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the other 3 factors are low education, substance abuse, and mental illness. Next slide. Many of you are probably familiar with this power and control wheel here referenced often in your line of work. And we put it up here today to make the point that an animal cruelty can be used in any one of these spokes, kind of in the same way in a power and control scenario, because violence against humans and animals is still, at the end of the day, violence. And acknowledging that those things happen together and looking out for everyone involved in that situation. Next slide. I'm not going to go into the details of these case studies, but these are all representative of animals who were involved in different ways in different spokes of this wheel in cases that we worked on during my time in humane law enforcement. And I put it up for 2 reasons. First, to point out that there's a snake on here and a cow. It's not just limited to companion animals, the use of animals to control and intimidate someone. And also to point out 2 of these cases involved economic or financial control of a person. And so animals can connect to that as well, based on the care that they need, or the ability of someone to leave a situation, but also have the financial stability to take their animals with them. Right?
So these are some of the common reasons that we hear from survivors as to why, or reasons given for the cruelty that has been perpetrated against their companion animal. So the most common reason that we hear is that the threat or harm to the companion animal was done to maintain control over the human, to prevent them from leaving. We've also heard that it can be used as a way to threaten the human partner. For example, saying, whatever I do to this animal, I'm going to then do to you. It can be a sign of jealousy or rage out of the attention that's given to the companion animal. And we'll see that in a case study next. And then finally, can also be redirected anger. So for example, there was one case where the partner wouldn't answer her cell phone when she was out with her friends, and the boyfriend then took out his anger on her pet dog over the lack of response. So approximately 1 out of every 3 women in domestic violence shelters report that they delayed their escape out of fear for their companion animals. This is a statistic that is averaged over the many studies that have been done to chronicle this phenomenon. There's a couple things that I want to point out. Number one, it points to the importance of us having safety mechanisms in place for domestic violence survivors to escape with their companion animals, whether that be domestic violence shelters that accept animals or fostering situations in the community through a local animal shelter that allow an animal to stay there until the human can find permanent housing. The other thing that I really want to point out about this slide is that the statistic is all these studies were done by polling women in domestic violence shelters. So this sample is only women who did eventually escape their abuser. So I would venture to say that the overall statistic is likely much higher than what is represented. So I'm going to go through a case study out of Washington from a couple of years ago. I'm not going to go too graphically into the details of what happened in this case, but the legal issues that emerged in this case, I think, are really interesting for us to look at. So this was a case that first occurred in 2018. The human guardian was named Julie, and she had a 7-year-old Chihuahua dog named Mona. That was a Chihuahua Wiener Dachshund dog mix. She frequently referred to Mona as her baby, her companion. She doted on her. And as I mentioned before, her partner became jealous of that love and attention that she was lavishing onto Mona. Julie was involved with the defendant in this case, whose last name is Abdi Issa. So if you're looking for this case, it's Washington versus Abdi Issa. She was involved with him for several months. He quickly became controlling and made threats against both Julie and Mona. There were 2 allegations of prior abuse to Mona when Julie was not there, which Abdi Issa claimed were both accidental injuries. And then eventually that abuse escalated to the point where Mona was killed. So the legal issues in this case were particularly interesting because we started looking at who was the victim in this case. Was it the dog, Mona? Was it Julie, the human owner? Was it society as a whole? Or was this a victimless crime? So the Washington Sentencing Reform Act defines a crime victim as any person who sustained emotional, psychological, physical, or financial injury as a result of the crime charged. So originally, the defendant was convicted of felony animal cruelty, and the crime was given a domestic violence designation, which is not an additional crime, but it's a label that allows other sentencing remedies to be put in place. So for example, in this case, it allowed the court to order a protection order for Julie against Abdi Issa. Abdi Issa appealed this decision, and this is, it went up to the appellate court. So for all of you non-lawyers, we have the trial court at the bottom, and then the appellate court in the middle, and the Washington Supreme Court at the top. So this is at that middle tier. And he essentially argued that this was a victimless crime. Because Mona is a dog, she doesn't fit within that definition of a crime victim for the purposes of that sentencing statute. And the appellate court agreed with him. They said that Abdi Issa committed the crime of animal cruelty against Mona, not Julie. They said that we agree Julie was likely the ultimate target of the cruelty, but the language limits domestic violence designation crimes to just those which are committed against one household member against another. And they didn't consider Mona to be a household member. They also said that they disagree that Julie's ownership of Mona makes Julie a victim of animal cruelty. They said it's true in Washington, we consider pets as personal property, which is true in all 50 states. But they said, well, the legislature has created these other statutes that specifically target property damage. So really, if the state had wanted Julie to be considered a crime victim for this crime, they should have charged Adjisa with property damage, not animal cruelty, which we found just absolutely absurd. So thankfully, this was appealed to the Washington Supreme Court. Myself and another attorney, David Rosengard, did amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief. And thankfully, the Washington Supreme Court reversed that awful appellate court decision. They held that Julie's testimony suggested psychological abuse, which was a part of a larger pattern of assaultive, coercive, and controlling behavior. And they also said that the Sentencing Reform Act's broad definition of victim applies to any crime sentence, including animal cruelty. And Julie is a victim under the definitions because she suffered. She suffered emotional harm after Mona was killed. She suffered financial harm because Mona was her property. And she suffered psychological harm. So under the plain language, they said, of this statute and related statutes, animal cruelty can be designated as a crime of domestic violence. And the other really wonderful thing that they did in this opinion was they specifically cited to some of the research that we had presented in our amicus brief. There's, I'm sure all of you know, tons of research out there that goes into the link between animal cruelty and domestic violence. And so they specifically, in their opinion, cited to that research and noted that there is this link between animal cruelty and domestic violence, that animals are commonly used as a tool to intimidate and control their human victims. And just a year after this opinion came out, the Washington legislature actually amended their laws to specifically include animal cruelty within their definition of coercive control under the statute, so that there's absolutely no room for ambiguity in the future. So we also know that there are links to animal cruelty and child maltreatment. So in one study of domestic violence homes, half of the children reported that their abuser threatened to harm or kill a beloved animal in order to maintain control over their human victims. And this is an area that has historically not been as well researched and studied as other aspects of the link. So, which is why I was so excited to see this new study come out just last year. So I provided the citation at the bottom. It's entitled "An Exploration of the Relationship Between Cat, Dog, and Small Pet Animal and Child Abuse." It found that animal abuse increases the likelihood of child abuse in a home by 641%. And those statistics were even higher, up to 1,000%, 3,000% for abuse of a cat, dog, or other small companion animal. So this means that if there is abuse of a cat, a dog, a small pet animal in a home, the likelihood of child abuse also occurring in that home goes up 6 times, 10 times, 30 times more likely, depending on the type of animal and the type of abuse that's being perpetrated against that animal. And these connections are all the more important to note because animals are a source of comfort for children. They're a protective factor, and they can help aid in the comfort of children who are in homes where there is violence and abuse happening. Because of this heightened dependency on animals and their deeper relationship in these homes, children will often interfere to protect their animals from violence, which places them at greater risk as well. And another area that I think doesn't get talked about often enough is the psychological impact that that children suffer when they witness animal cruelty. So I put up another citation to a study here, Traumatized Witnesses, a review of childhood exposure to animal cruelty. This was a meta study, so it looks at like a dozen complete studies, and summarizes and analyzes and synthesizes all of that information. And they found that witnessing animal cruelty itself is a form of psychological trauma and an adverse childhood experience. And it can lead to the development of other psychological disorders, depression, anxiety, and all of these different things in children who have witnessed animal cruelty. So even if the child themselves is not suffering abuse or neglect directly, even being in a home where animal cruelty is being perpetrated is negatively impacting that child. We also see a link between sexual assault of animals and sexual assault of humans. So in one study, 46% of animal sexual abuse offenders had either prior to or after their animal-related offense, they had sexually exploited or offended against children and or adults. And 11% of individuals in this study convicted of having sex with animals, of committing animal sexual assault, had prior convictions for child pornography. So we do see quite a bit of overlap, particularly in the realm of recordings of sexual assault, whether it be recordings of sexual assault of children or recordings of sexual assault of animals. There is considerable overlap in those cases. We also know that there's a link between animal cruelty and elder abuse. 35% of adult protective services workers reported that their clients had talked about their pets being threatened, injured, killed, or denied care by a caregiver. And 45 of those surveyed in the same study reported that their clients either purposefully or negligently neglected a companion animal, and the vast majority of those cases coincided with self-neglect. And this is another area where we have not seen a whole lot of research being done into the overlap between animal cruelty being perpetrated and elder abuse being perpetrated. However, I do want to give a special shout out to Fulton County in Georgia. Jill Hollander leads their elder abuse unit there and also specializes in animal cruelty prosecutions, and has gathered some really incredible data and has helped to fill some of that research gap. So she found in her cases spanning from 2021 to 2022, there was 258 elder abuse cases in total, and 12% of those included animal-related issues, whether that be animal cruelty or neglect or threats. But she did note that there was a significant likelihood of underreporting for that statistic. Of that 12% of those cases where there was an animal-related component, oh, I'm so sorry, the slide has gotten a little troubled here, so it's making it hard to read, but the vast majority of those cases, the primary charge or harm in that case was financial exploitation of the elder. In 3 of the cases, there was severe violence perpetrated against both the elder and the animal, resulting in the death of the animal. In 1 case, there was severe neglect resulting in the death of an animal. And then in 1 case, there was severe hoarding and self-neglect. So I want to go through one of the case studies that came out of this study. There was an 86-year-old female, and the names here have been changed. So her name, for the purposes of our case today, is Anne. She had minor mobility impairment. She owned her home, was on Social Security and pension, totaling around $3,600 a month. Her husband had given her a dog 6 years ago before he died that became her closest companion and source of support. In April 2020, her grandson started visiting more often, and her dog Maxie started getting out in the yard. She became more isolated and stopped taking Maxie on her daily walks and stopped being seen outside of her homes frequently. In June of that year, her grandson moved in, and Maxie, the dog, was found 3 times at large and returned by neighbors. In August of that year, Mark was added to Anne's bank accounts. And then in September, we finally get a report of suspected elder abuse, which led to this investigation. The investigation found that most of Anne's bank accounts were overdrawn. There was $125,000 withdrawn from investment accounts to pay for the grandson's debts. He bought a new $50,000 car. He'd spent $20,000 in electronics and gambling and cell phones. Anne's health had significantly deteriorated during this time. She became less mobile. Her and her dog were essentially confined to a single room. And the investigation showed a couple of things regarding specifically Anne and Maxie's relationship. Number one, Mark was leaving the gate and doors to the home open so that Maxie would get out, and essentially gaslighting his grandmother, saying, you left the door open, you can't control, like you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your dog, you need me. And there was 3 separate times where Mark had driven both Maxie and Anne to the animal shelter and threatened to surrender Maxie unless she complied with his requests. Now I'll turn it back over to Emily to talk about juvenile animal abusers.
So we just heard from Kathleen about the trauma that children can experience when witnessing animal cruelty or living in the home with that occurring, and saw the statistics of how often that happens if they are living in a home with that violence. The other side of that, or the part that becomes a cycle, is that juveniles who engage in animal cruelty are more than twice as likely to have suffered maltreatment themselves. So seeing and witnessing that, being involved in that abuse, then can create this cycle of violence where they are perpetrating animal cruelty as well. Next slide. Conduct disorder is in the DSM-5 and talks about antisocial behaviors, which include animal cruelty. And we include this particular aspect up here about the earlier median onset because the average age of a person who with a conduct disorder would start abusing animals at about 6.5 years old. That would be the first of before bullying or fire setting or vandalism. And so that's important for us to point out because that's when we believe the first action should be taken to intervene, to find out more, ask more questions, and to intervene at that point before these other, as they're getting older, these other things are coming into play as well. Doesn't necessarily mean that just because they abused an animal at a younger age that these other things are going to happen later, but it is an indicator and worth taking that time to have a proper intervention. We had a case study where a juvenile, a cat was found, a neighborhood cat was found deceased, and originally the family said that their juvenile son had told them, it was this accident. He was playing with the cat and this horrible accident happened, and he felt so awful and he was really ashamed. And then through the investigation, it turned out that it was through the conduct of the juvenile, intentional conduct, that the cat ended up deceased. And so it is a good example of why looking a little bit further into a situation of a deceased animal in the home that might seem somewhat suspicious can reveal things that could be relevant down the line as they grow older and require earlier intervention for a better outcome for everyone involved. Next slide. It doesn't boil down to the old adage of boys will be boys. There are reasons why this kind of conduct occurs, and a lot of reasons you can see on the list here. And it makes sense when you think about where this behavior comes from, looking back at that cycle of violence and how these things on this list would develop out of that cycle. Next slide.
So I want to make a note about the link theories generally. So there are two broad theories about how we view the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence. And the first is what we call the violence graduation hypothesis. And this states that animal cruelty precedes interpersonal aggression. Sometimes people will say people first practice on animals and then graduate to crimes against humans. But really, over the last 20 years, the research has better supported the second theory, which is what we call the deviance generalization hypothesis, or the general deviance theory, which states that the greater the frequency and variety of antisocial acts, the more likely the individual is to engage in more serious forms of antisocial behavior, including violence. So it's not so much that it's, a stepping stone of, you start with animals and then you go to humans and then, you're graduating upwards. It's more of this larger web where one form of antisocial behavior, like animal cruelty and like bullying, like harm against humans or threats of harm, are all going to be clustered together and overlap with one another. We've seen in all of these different studies that animal cruelty will be used as a way to perpetrate violence against humans. So it's not necessarily that we're starting with animals and then becoming violent against humans. It's all a lot more interwoven and complex, those connections. Okay. And I know we're focusing mostly on familial violence in this webinar, but I do also want to note that animal cruelty is related to other crimes as well. So animal cruelty, animal fighting has been closely linked to things like weapons trafficking and drug trafficking, even human trafficking. And 96% of animal cruelty offenders, according to one study, had either prior or subsequent criminal offenses, and the most common ones were drug possession, assault, and theft. So even if there isn't this necessarily a familial connection, we are seeing a greater overlap with other antisocial and criminal behaviors. And this slide also shows that, not only is there this link between animal cruelty and familial violence, but we also see a broader web between animal cruelty and the underlying psychological factors. So the same psychological factors that cause a person to commit animal cruelty might very well be contributing to other violent and criminal behaviors. And that's why we think it's important for us to talk about the psychological possible diagnoses that sometimes underlie animal cruelty, because sometimes targeting these underlying issues will not only improve outcomes for the animals in that person's life, but the humans as well. So these are some of the different diagnoses that are commonly associated with intentional or active animal cruelty. The ones that are in bold are the ones where animal cruelty is actually one of the diagnosis factors in the DSM-5. So conduct disorder in juveniles, oppositional defiant disorder, antisocial personality disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, paraphilia, substance use disorder, schizophrenia, and trauma disorders are all things that we've seen overlap with that kind of active physical animal cruelty. And then when it comes to things like negligent or passive cruelty, like animal neglect, there's overlap with underlying disorders of hoarding, depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorders. So now we want to kind of switch and talk about what laws exist across the nation in order to identify and address these links that we've been talking about. So there are now 42 states and one territory that explicitly allow animals to be included in domestic violence protection orders, which is really wonderful. It's only been in the last 20 years that these laws have even existed. So the fact that we've come this far in this amount of time is truly amazing. The one thing I want to point out is that about half of those states limit their domestic violence protection orders to include just companion animals. And as Emily mentioned earlier, there are a large number of species that can be subjected to this link-related violence. And so we really love to see those laws being expanded beyond just companion animals to include farmed animals and captive wildlife. But I also want to point out that even in those states where there's not an explicit statute that allows animals to be included in domestic violence protection orders, there's usually going to be a catch-all provision in your statute that says something like the court can order any condition for the protection order which is necessary for the petitioner's safety. And that can be a way for the court to then order custody or control of the animal to be put with the petitioner if you can demonstrate that, you know, I'm not going to be safe unless I have my animal with me, and I can be assured that that animal is safe as well. Another growing trend we've seen in the past few years is the inclusion of animal cruelty in states' definitions of domestic violence. And just 2 years ago in 2024, there was 4 states that started including animal cruelty in their definitions of coercive control. And coercive control is then included in the definition of domestic violence. So this map does include those kind of roundabout definitions as well. But these statutes are so important because it allows petitioners to request protection orders based solely on the animal cruelty. So even if the person has not themselves been threatened, if their own personal safety has not been threatened, if their companion animal has been harmed or threatened, they can then use that as a reason to seek a protection order because of this link, because we know that there is such an overlap between animal cruelty and domestic violence. We're also seeing more and more states include animal cruelty in the definition of stalking as well. So threats or threats being made against companion animals and that kind of harassment being included in the definition of stalking. And the Animal Legal Defense Fund publishes a fact sheet that compiles and synthesizes a lot of this research. So this is available publicly on our website. So I just want to draw everyone's attention to that resource. And all of the studies that are noted in here are cited in the endnotes. So if you're curious to go and look at the full studies, you're able to do that as well. In 2019, we started a partnership with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and we've been educating family court judges and juvenile court judges about this link between animal cruelty and familial violence. And we've produced a technical assistance bulletin, which is essentially like a bench book that judges can have with them in order to easily and quickly consult statistics about the link, information about their statutes, and information about what kinds of questions they should be asking in these types of cases. So this whole bench book is also available on the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges website. They've got an entire webpage broken out to all of our work together with webinars and other great resources. And then, of course, the National Link Coalition, which I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. If you haven't already signed up for their monthly newsletter, I highly recommend that you do that. It's got just so much great information. And then I'll turn back to Emily to talk about what kinds of things are included in our modern animal cruelty laws, so you can better identify it in your own work.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And I'll try to be succinct here so we do have time for questions at the end. We can go on to the next slide. So animal cruelty laws are criminal, so they vary state by state, but there are some commonalities across states. But the biggest variation comes down to how the states define animal, which is relevant because then those are the animals that are protected by their laws. And as we saw earlier, different species can be involved in situations of familial violence. So it's good to know what's covered and protected in your state. The gray states here you can see have no statutory definition of animal, but that's not always a bad thing. Courts tend to interpret the definition of animal pretty broadly, so that can work out okay in these cases. The green states again have vague language. All dumb animals or all brute creatures, which is pretty inclusive. The teal states are states that limit the definition to just vertebrates. And then just some interesting ones, about 10 states exclude fish, 4 states exclude livestock, Kentucky excludes cold-blooded animals, and South Carolina excludes fowl. Next slide. Unless you're working at the county level or the city level where you have ordinance violations, most animal cruelty offenses are going to be misdemeanors or felonies. And so the way those usually break down depends on first the degree of harm to the animal or the severity of harm. So in felonies, there's going to be probably a serious physical injury, which is usually defined as something that's going to permanently damage the animal, or death. And then the mental state comes into play as well. So for misdemeanors, the mental state is usually negligence, recklessness, knowingly, whereas in felonies, it's intentional and maliciously. Slide. And these are how the common animal offenses break down between misdemeanors and felonies, speaking pretty broadly. Next slide. We'll just talk a little bit about each of those so you have an idea of what is encompassed in when we talk about animal neglect and other crimes. Neglect is a crime of omission, so the non-action is the crime. So in this case, not providing care to an animal and that resulting in unnecessary or unjustifiable pain or suffering. States are going to differ by what they require for minimum care, but usually it's food, water, and shelter. Again, they're going to vary on their definition of shelter. Some states will be very specific and other states will be vague. Some states will say, you know, protect from the elements, have a 3-sided structure, and some states will just say adequate shelter. Again, veterinary care and how that's phrased in a statute can differ. Sometimes the statute will just say the animals need to be provided care, and that's going to mean veterinary care as well as care required in grooming for animals that need that in order to maintain their health. And then other states will require specifically veterinary care. Next slide. Abuse includes all of the offenses on this list here and usually focuses on the unnecessary and unjustifiable physical pain to the animal. As a side note here, I know there might be some veterinarians in the audience, and really veterinarians are crucial overall in the response to animal cruelty in a community, but with physical abuse cases especially, because they're going to provide the necessary evidence that speaks to the severity of an injury, the length of the suffering of the animal, what that experience was like for the animal, how painful. All of that is necessary evidence in order to hold someone accountable for these offenses. Next slide. Dogfighting and cockfighting are the most common types of animal fighting. There are other types like bear wrestling and hog dog rodeos. But animal fighting is a crime across the country and federally. Most states will also criminalize actions that feed into that practice. So the breeding of the animals that are going to be fighting or the training of them, as well as being a spectator or offering a venue up for animal fights. Next slide. We've talked about sexual assault of animals in this presentation. About a third of states have really outdated laws related to sexual assault of animals where the language is odd and vague. My theory is that it's an uncomfortable topic to talk about in the legislature, and representatives don't want to be the one who introduced the bill and talk about it at committee, and then the language gets really archaic. But the rest have more specific laws that also include related acts like creation of bestiality pornography or coercing another person to engage in bestiality or doing so in the presence of a minor. Next slide. We will never talk about this topic without calling out West Virginia for not having a law on the books about sexual assault of animals. So here you are, anyone in West Virginia, we're happy to help you try to get that through. Next slide. Almost across the board, states are going to have an exemption to their cruelty laws that include these practices. It's worth noting, though, that conduct that is outside of the normal practice, what would be considered normal in these different areas, can still be considered cruelty and subject to the animal protection laws in that state. Next slide. Many of you are probably familiar with child abuse reporting laws. As attorneys, we have mandatory reporting duty for child abuse. And for a long time, veterinarians have been made mandatory reporters for animal cruelty. Oregon even makes a connection between, mentions the link in their mandatory veterinary reporting statute. And but a more recent trend has been to acknowledge that there is that connection between animal cruelty and other crimes, and having social workers engage in cross-reporting as well. Next slide. It really becomes valuable when a state has these laws for cross-reporting for social service workers. We had a case one time where a humane investigator was looking into a report about a dog that was being starved, essentially. And when he responded to that call, he noticed a young girl, like preteen, who was thin and nonverbal, developmentally disabled. And he had some concerns about her, so he reported that to Department of Human Services. And they picked up the case, they looked into it. The case of the girl had been reported in the past, but because she was nonverbal, it's really difficult to determine what was going on in that situation. But it was the photo of the dog from that case and the body condition of the dog being so emaciated that caused the social worker and the doctors in the child's case to look further back into the girl's history, really investigate what was happening in that situation, and realize that this was not a safe environment for the girl or the dog, and that there was criminal conduct taking place as far as the withholding of nutrition from both the dog and the girl. And so you can see how it's really mutually beneficial, because to report going both ways in animal cases to child services and the reverse, because there is such overlap, because they are such similar victims, not being able to articulate always what's happening and relying on the adults in their life for their needs. And so I cannot stress enough how important cross-reporting is, and I hope that we see more of these laws on the books for social service workers. We hope to have provided you with the foundation of information on the animal cruelty laws, so you do have the confidence to do that cross-reporting when it comes up for you, if you have that duty or you feel compelled to do so. Next slide.
Oh, real quick, I just want to say also that some of the pushback we hear about cross-reporting laws from social service workers is them saying, we feel like we have a duty to our human clients and we don't want to betray that trust. To that, I would say, especially if there's children in the home, given all the research that we've seen about the negative impact and adverse experiences that witnessing animal cruelty can have on a child, it's actually going to be in the child's best interest for there to be some level of intervention. And also, when we're intervening in an animal cruelty case, unless the cruelty is particularly severe, usually the first response is always going to be education and aid in order to correct those violations. And so it's not that reporting suspected animal cruelty is necessarily going to result in the animal being taken away from that family. It might be what gives them the resources and aid that they need for that entire family's health and welfare.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, and I just wanted to finish by saying we're here for you as a resource if you want to learn more about any of the cases that we mentioned, or are curious about more depth on the laws, whatever it might be, we are here to help you in this realm. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much, Emily and Kathleen. That was a lot of information and such valuable information. And we are so grateful for your time and your expertise. We will go ahead, everyone. Yes, I see lots of thank yous, amazing information. Thank you, coming through the chat. So yes, applause all around from our audience. We do, everyone, have a few minutes for a Q&A. So if you would like to ask Emily or Kathleen a question about any of the content today, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We do have a few questions that were entered earlier that can kick us off, that I will go ahead and start with, but I will keep my eye on that chat box to see if any more come through. First question was one from Jan, and it's kind of a multi-parter, and I have a part to throw in as well. But Jan, referencing back to the maps that you shared about animal protection laws, are there any states with pending legislation for some of the protections that you shared? Jan is particularly interested in states that might be adding animal cruelty to their definition of domestic violence. So basically states that are gray on that map right now, but might be turning the color we want them to turn in the future. Any updates on that, Emily or Kathleen? Is that something your organization tracks?
We do work on those types of laws. I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of specific states that have those bills pending. But I did see somebody in the comments also note that the National Link Coalition, their newsletter tracks ongoing legislation. So that is a really wonderful resource to see what legislation is pending in your state.
Wonderful. Yes, that is a great resource. I second that recommendation to take a look at the National Link Coalition. Follow-up question, is there anything that our viewers today can do to push for these protections in their own communities, their own states?
I mean, just reaching out to your legislators is hugely valuable. Let them know that this is an issue that's important to you. You can reference our annual rankings report, which does include all of these different laws that we've been talking about, like cross-reporting and protection orders. If you want to reach out to us directly at Action One at this email that's on screen, we're happy to provide a more curated list of areas where your state or territory can improve, and talk through some of the different options of what would be beneficial for your state to have.
That's great. Thank you. Question from Deborah that I just saw come through. Deborah is wondering if there is a statute of limitations on these types of animal crimes. I imagine it might be different based on the offense, but can you guys speak to that?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the state. The most common lengths are going to be about 1 year for misdemeanor crimes and 3 to 5 years for felonies. But that does depend on state. There's 2 states that just don't have any statute of limitations at all. So it's really going to depend on where you're at. I do want to say on our website, if you go through the rankings report on aldf.org and you click on your state, there'll be an option to download what we call our compendium. And that is a compilation of all of the different laws that go into our rankings report. And that includes things like statute of limitations, all of the different animal cruelty laws, all of the cross-reporting laws, and it's all broken down by category. So that's a really great resource as well if you're curious to learn more about what's in your state.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathleen. This one is actually just a comment, but I thought it was great to share. This was from Eric earlier. He says that Fulton County, or the county seat of Atlanta, has a specialized elder abuse and animal abuse prosecutor team and several great animal support shelters. Eric covers the counties west and south of Atlanta and is currently working to expand pet-friendly shelter options in those counties in West Georgia. So that is great to hear, Eric, and wonderful work it sounds like you and your team are doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, that team providing those resources, that's where we got our statistics for elder abuse. That's been hugely valuable. So thank you so much for that work that you all are doing. It's really incredible.
Agreed. Question from Courtney. It looks like Courtney also is a prosecutor, a criminal prosecutor and a special prosecutor for animal cruelty cases. Courtney says, I have a specific case that I was looking for some guidance on. Would either of you entertain talking it through with me? Is that something that you would be open to, Kathleen or Emily?
Yes, that's actually a lot of what we do in our day-to-day work. I think you could contact me through this Action One email address and reference this webinar, and that you'd like to follow up with me and Kathleen directly, and we can engage with you about that for sure.
That's wonderful, and what a great resource to offer for folks, because you guys do have such expertise in this area. We have just a little bit of time left. I know it is, we just hit the hour, so I know folks are having to hop off, but we may have time for one or two more questions. I did want to circle back, Emily, because you did mention the important role that veterinarians play in this work. Specifically, we know now that animal cruelty can be a red flag for child abuse, elder abuse, other types of family violence. We also know that veterinarians have frequent contact with animals. So they may be the sort of first person to notice if something is amiss. What advice do you have for veterinary providers if they suspect that abuse may be occurring? Is there anything that you would recommend that they do or that they don't do?
Yes, I have a lot to say on that point, but I'll try to be succinct about it. Really, I think it comes down to veterinarians having confidence in their expertise as veterinarians, and realizing that they know when something is wrong with an animal, when something is off, when the story doesn't match the injury that they're seeing in exam, for example. And then remembering that it's not their job to know, to be the judge or jury in what happened there. It's just their job to report their concern to the enforcement agency in their area. And so there are a lot of like I would say concerns that come up around veterinary reporting, understandably, for a lot of different reasons. But I think at the end of the day, you are the expert as a veterinarian, and it's not your job to know for certain. You just have to have that good faith belief that that's what's going on. And we have a lot of resources available as well for veterinarians and veterinary clinics to create a standard operating procedure so that your whole team knows what to do when something like that happens. You know how to report, who to report to, what's going to happen, takes the mystery out of it. We have a lot of trainings and online trainings for veterinarians and their team, just to really build that confidence and build on their expertise in that realm as well. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thanks, guys. Last question, I think, unless I see some more come through the chat. But Emily or Kathleen, do you know of any resources that might be available for our Canadian counterparts? I know everything that we talked about today really is focused on US law. Anything that you're aware of that might be helpful for folks that are based in Canada?
Yeah, so there's the violence link, and now I'm blanking on the full name. But there's an organization in Canada that is essentially akin to the National Link Coalition. And they do provide annual conferences. Maine Canada has conferences as well that provide a lot of really great information on this. Animal justice is kind of similar to ALDF, the Animal Legal Defense Fund in Canada, and can provide resources as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Well, we are 4 minutes past the hour. So we are going to go ahead and close out our guest webinar for today. But thank you so much to everyone who attended. And of course, a special thank you to Kathleen and to Emily for their time and expertise and sharing such valuable information with us today. Thank you both so much. And everyone.